there has to be some kind of identifier, like it may be baked into the data file. Okay. But that all quickly falls apart. So if it's an AI generated image, there's some kind of identifier in the file that you don't see. It's something that like Google can identify this as artificial intelligence. I can't put this on the front page of the New York Times. We know that this is AI. But the way technology works, as soon as you grab a screen, right, nothing comes with it. It becomes sterile. That's a problem. The one thing I wanted people to have, to be honest about what it is that we're seeing. And I don't know how we're going to fix it.
Hey, welcome to episode 388 of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one solution for photographers of all skill levels to deliver and sell your photos online. I'm your host, Raymond Hadfield, and today we are chatting with wet plate photographer Shane Balkowitsch about the problem with AI and photography. Now, before you tune out, just know that this is not a "is AI good or bad" interview. We will not be talking about the role that AI will play in other elements of our lives and the potential ramifications that it could have. We are simply focusing on the image and media aspect of artificial intelligence and image creation. So while neither of us are experts in AI or experts in ChatGPT or Midjourney or anything like that, we do have experience in the world of images. And where we're at today, we are facing a rather complicated, confusing, and potentially crippling problem with how AI images are classified as photographs, and the ramifications of us not coming up with a standard definition of what a photograph is and what it is not could be catastrophic. And I'm not overreacting here. So I want to bring light to this conversation, this idea, and just that we need to have a conversation about it and try to come up with an answer. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's podcast interview with Shane Balkowitsch. Shane, last time you were on, we talked a lot about your photography, getting into wet plates and whatnot. There have been a lot of new listeners since last time you were on. So before we get into today's episode, can you just kind of remind me and listeners kind of how you got your journey into a unconventional form of photography?
Yeah, one of the oldest analog photography processes known to man. So wet plate collodion photography was invented in 1851 by Frederick Scott Archer. Back in 2012, I never even owned a camera. I saw a wet plate online, and I just asked the photographer, what was that? He said, it's a wet plate. I don't know what about it attracted me to this. I'd never had owned a camera, never had any interest in photography whatsoever. And I said that I would like to do that. And he had been a photographer. His name is Paul DeLoreans. He's a great guy. And he said, well, are you a photographer, Shane? I said, no, I don't own a camera. And he said, well, there's no way a non-photographer will ever teach himself wet plating. And within 45 days of that conversation, I had made my first exposure. And here I am about 11 years into this journey of chasing this analog photography.
I know when you tell me that this is analog photography, I kind of laugh because it is as analog as it gets, right? Like you almost just breezed over that.
It's the other end of the spectrum.
Right, exactly. Like even more so than film photography. So again, for those listening who might not know what wet plate is, can you just talk about the intensive steps that are involved just to be able to capture an exposure?
Yeah, so you have to put yourself in the Victorian era, and you have to think about Abraham Lincoln had his wet plate taken, if that gives you an idea. So you see every once in a while you'll watch a Western where the guy will have a magnesium shooter where it goes pop like that, and he's taking a picture of someone. It was new technology. That's about 1905, okay? This process was 55 years before that. So you have to, I'm making silver on glass images. So all the images that I make are made out of pure silver. And what's beautiful about pure silver is that silver doesn't degrade. So these are the most archival photographs man has ever created. So when someone comes into my studio on a Friday and I take their portrait, I can honestly tell them that this photograph outlasts any other photograph ever taken of you in your life. And we abandoned this in 1885 for why humans abandoned a lot of things. For something more convenient, dry plating came around, and the photographer didn't have to pour messy chemicals onto a plate to get the bromide salts to pull silver out of a silver nitrate bath and make a photosensitive plate. So I'm essentially making, for some of your listeners, I'm making sheet film on stained glass. And we just abandoned this in 1885. And in my opinion, I'm, like I said, down this rabbit hole 11 years. It's the most beautiful photographic process man has ever invented. And it wasn't a good enough reason to abandon this. And there's less than 1,000 of us in the world that can pull off a wet plate today. So I've got works at 68 different museums around the world, including the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, the Heard Museum, the Royal Photographic Society over there with you. That's the oldest photographic society in the world. They have 2 of my plates. So it's been a wild journey, and I'm just honored to be able to. When I first started, I never had, and I thought that anyone would be interested in what I had to say or any of my work. I was just taking photographs with my family, and then it just kind of snowballed into what it is today, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah. So finding a reason, a purpose, a why in your photography has definitely served you well, right, with your subjects. Do you think that you would still be shooting wet plates if you didn't have the same why of capturing Native Americans with this same process?
I think it's the whole hook of history that I'm really fascinated with. I like making these are objects, understand, when we use our digital cameras, and I don't own any other camera, by the way. The only other camera I have is my iPhone. So, but when I open the shutter on, we should explain to your listeners as well. So the shutter on your iPhone's open for about 1/60th of a second on average. These are 10-second exposures. So it's 600 times longer to make a wet plate than it is with a modern day phone. So my Native American thing, Northern Plains Native Americans, a modern wet plate perspective, is just, I consider it my life's work. But I'm in love with the fact that I'm capturing light at any particular time. And that light is put in pure silver on something that is going to be here long after I'm gone.
Yeah.
And there's something magical about that. There's something about the fact that these images, I'm making something that's very permanent. And if I label the plate properly on the back and put the date and the plate number and who the subject is and where the photo was taken and the f-stops or whatever I want to put on the back, that record is going to be here long after I'm gone.
It's a very cool thing. We as photographers love to, the trope is to capture memories.
It is.
You can't get any longer of a memory to preserve than archiving
a wet plate, because
yeah.
I've got historical examples just a couple of feet from me here on the shelf, and they look as good today as they did 170 years ago. Which, I mean, if you have go to your mother's shoebox of photographs, which I know your mother probably has a shoebox full, you can.
No, she gave them all to me. I have them all, and they're
you can
all
look at
terrible
them,
condition.
and they're in terrible condition, right? And they're only 40 years old. So
yeah,
it's a magnificent process, and silver. I tell the students, and I have college students, and I have about 8 different classes come out every year. Hundreds of students come out to my studio to see this process firsthand. And I tell the students, if you put a silver spoon on the ground and you come back 500 years from now, what's on the ground? And the answer must be a silver spoon. Mm-hmm. And that speaks to the permanence of these images. It's the polar opposite of digital. Our topic today is artificial intelligence, AI, and stuff like that. So I'm as old school. My process is as old school as it gets.
So then why are we talking about AI today?
I made my living in technology. So I noticed that this new technology, artificial intelligence, and it's been on my radar for a couple of years. So I've done a deep dive into this, and I've read many books, and I've listened to many podcasts of the world's experts about this technology and stuff. And AI, a lot of people think AI is a new thing, right? I mean, they were discussing AI in the 1950s. So this isn't a new thing. It's just now in the 2020s, we're able to actually have the technology to do some of the things that they knew that we were going to be able to do back in the 1950s. And so I was on Instagram and I started seeing these images, and I thought they were fantastic. I was seeing these images pop up, and these people were making these different images. And then I noticed that they started calling these photographs. Here's a photograph, here's an AI photograph. And I'm at that point, my gut told me, hold on a minute, this is not right. We need to draw some kind of line here in the sand that says that these aren't photographs. And so I've written 3 articles for Petapixel. The first one was about how these are not photographs, that in order to be a photograph, you have to use light and you have to use a photosensitive material or a sensor, if we want to talk about your modern day listeners and stuff. And none of that is happening with AI photography. So then I dove in deeper, and how is it doing this? And I learned about the diffusion and how it takes images and then it diffuses them, it adds a bunch of static, and then it comes out of the static, and then it judges that result and then makes decisions, and then it gives you back what it thinks you want to see. And so I started saying the people that are making these images need to have their own terminology. Like, photography is photography, and it shouldn't have to encompass things, other technologies that it's not, right? I mean, it's not. A gas car is not a horse. And we need to come up with our own term. They need to come up with their own terminology. And, I had thrown out in that article, what I come up with is prompted artificial graphic design was an acronym that I had come up with. And other people have come up with promptology and promptography, and there's a million different things. But I do see that there now, since I made that argument, that we need to have terminology that surrounds us so we understand what we're talking about, and that everyone who's viewing these things understands what it is we're viewing. I think that's very important, okay? Because these aren't photographs. And this process, you understand, a year ago, Raymond, you would look at an AI portrait, let's just say, because I'm a portrait person, so let's talk about portraits. You would look at an AI portrait and you would just kind of laugh. There's like 3 ears and 12 fingers and things like that. And things were wonky. Everything was wonky a year ago. And then 6 months ago, it's not so wonky. And now just recently, it's really not wonky.
Yeah.
And I'm predicting by the end of the year that, even the trained eye, a trained expert eye, a trained photographer, or historian will not be able to tell the difference between something that was artificially created and something that was real. And as a historian, as a person that's trying to document Native Americans, or the person that's trying just to document the people in my life around here, I mean, that's what my work is, right? It's a reflection of the times around my studio, of the people here. And it really, I push back on this, that let's stop calling this photography. Come up with your own terms, call it whatever you want. Just let's stop calling it photography. And a lot of people have really gotten behind that this is, everyone is, not everyone, but a lot of people are acknowledging now. But if you go to Instagram today and type in AI photography, last week there was 178,000 people that disagreed with that concept. So there's 178,000 AI photographs, and they're not photographs at all. And,
right.
And I asked an AI artist, I said, why are you using the word photograph? They said, well, it's just a marketing thing. That's what people relate to, is that you got to call it what you think it is or what it's like. And I said, that's not a good enough reason. It's you're calling an apple an orange, and that doesn't work. And we need to respect the field of photography. And that was my big first push. My big article was on AI photographs are not photographs. They're images, they're graphic designs, or whatever you want to come up with a name for them, but they're definitely not photographs. I even had someone on Facebook. You get the craziest article ideas sometimes when you're making statements and you're asking for, I'm trying not to be in a bubble, right? I'm trying to put my ideas out there and get feedback from people. And this one gentleman told me that it's a photograph because computers use fiber optics, and the fiber optics use light.
Use light. Oh my gosh.
So this was the reasoning that he justified calling it a photograph. If you if you talk about a stretch, right?
Right. That's about as stretched out as you get.
But that's some of the stuff that I've been dealing with. And I should tell your listeners, I'm not against AI at all. I have friends that, even wet plate artists, that actually make AI images, and I love them. I think they're fantastic. And the other thing that we have to worry about, Raymond, is, well, what are we going to do with these images? What's the purpose of them, really? It was an argument. I had a TEDx talk about 6 years ago, and I asked, why are we taking all these digital photographs? It just seems like a bunch of information that we're only looking at it on our little screens. Nobody's doing prints anymore, right? I mean, we're not doing exhibitions of our iPhone photographs. I mean, but we take more digital photographs today than the first 150 years of photography. I don't know if I mentioned that in the first podcast that we did. So what are we doing with these? Okay, we're seeing them on Instagram, we're seeing them on Facebook, we're sharing them, we're kicking them back and forth, and oh, that's beautiful and stuff. But is you're gonna have an exhibition? And there will be some exhibitions. I have no doubt that there will be exhibitions, and this will be curated work and so forth. But I mean, are people let's go back to portraiture. Okay, there was a photograph that a friend of mine did of a young girl, an AI photograph. She does not exist. She never existed. And she will never exist. And so I have to ask myself, will someone in the future, and that was my second article on this topic, was talking about how this is going to affect our history. Will someone in the future actually think, if they get a hold of that, because once you put it on the web, we know what happens with it, right? It's got a life of its own. Someone could stumble upon this picture of this redheaded young girl and think that she was actually somebody who felt pain and had love and died, and all the things that us humans do, all the human aspects of why I think I love photography. Like that's it's the human element of why am I with portraiture and I'm not taking pictures of pine trees, right? I mean, there's something about looking at a photograph of someone from 170 years ago There's something there. There's a relationship between the present and the past, and I can try to understand who that person was. You don't have that with this. So this girl could end up, maybe her photographs curated at a museum and they thought that she was someone else, or I mean, she doesn't have a name. And then there's the whole argument of who's the artist. Is it the person just prompting? Are they the artist, or is are we ready to give the artificial intelligence its due and say that it owns the rights? And I don't know if your listeners know, but if you read through the terms of these Midjourney and so forth like that, these different applications, you do not have the rights to any of the output. Okay, so the prompter does not have the rights to any of the output. So that's the first time that's happened, right? Like, when is an artist, let me ask you, when is the last time you knew of an artist that made something that didn't have the rights to it? When has that ever occurred before?
Never that I can think of. I mean, even that time that monkey took a photo with a camera, that monkey still got the ownership of that image. So
right.
Never.
So the terms of all these applications, so you're making, say you want to do an exhibition, say you want to do some, or is someone going to buy a print of that fake AI girl and hang it on their wall?
Right. Yeah. That
Who's going to do
is a
that?
big question. Yeah.
Am I going to sell it to who? Their mother? Their father? I mean, so then it goes back to the logical question is so what's the purpose? Why did we bring this into the world?
So let me ask you a question then, because I think one of the problems that we're having with describing these AI images is, one, because they look photorealistic.
Absolutely.
And we just don't have the language yet to describe, what it properly is. But also, when it comes to these images, I want to know, because the other conversation that's being had around a lot of this is any of this art, right? Because if it is AI creating art? Because apparently it is, if it owns the rights to it, all these weird legal questions. So from your standpoint, I know that we can get, technical definitions out of a dictionary or anything,
we
but
can.
How do you define art?
Yeah, and I wrote a third article for Petapixel. That was, so the first article was about these aren't photographs. The second was about how it's going to affect our history, and the third one, can we consider this art? I don't want to be in the situation where I'm the guy that's the gatekeeper to what's art, right? I mean, in that article, I gave some very good examples of the banana taped to the duct tape to the wall that sold for $120,000, right? In the early 1900s, an artist came into a gallery and submitted a urinal and said that this is art, or they just wanted to put it on a pedestal and said that this urinal is art. And there was a lot of debate there. So there's all these examples in the past where people were questioning whether or not these things are art. And I don't know whether or not they're art. And we gave in the article, I had a co-writer, we gave the pros and cons to both things, but we just couldn't be in the situation where we're saying that this is an art. I can't find myself telling someone else what art is and what art is not. So
sure.
But what the AI question is who's the owner and who's creating this?
No. Now we're going too far. I want to know, what is your definition of art? That's what I want to know. Like, when you see something, and because I think that we can all agree that when you see art, you know that it's art, but sometimes it's hard to put into words, right? So when you see something that you think this is art, how would you define that?
Well, I think it's anytime an artist decides to put labor into something and to actually bring something and to say, this is what I created, and then we can take whatever we want away from that. It's the intent, right? Was there an intent there? If a banana just got taped to a wall just for some reason, and it wasn't the artist saying, well, I taped this to the wall and this is a piece of art, there's a difference between that, right? Like, you wouldn't call that art, but then you have the intent of the artist saying, yeah, this is my art. And he stood by that, and the piece sold. It's about intent. And I understand that it's the intent of these people that are prompting the AI to give them things, who's actually creating it. We got to let your listeners know that these images are being constructed from billions of other images from other artists. And this is without permission. I went to a website and I found out over 30 of my Native American works were in the training of AI. And there was no permission. There was no, oh, we're going to give you some kind of compensation. There was none of that. It just was, they trained their algorithms on my work and billions of other photographers' work. And that's where it's coming up with that. I had this it occurred to me like how much control do we have over this AI? So I put out this AI challenge about a month ago where I had an idea of I did a piece of a woman with a moon head. Okay. So my prop master made this moon and it's called The Waning, and you can find it on maybe on Facebook. So I asked everyone, if this was your idea, if this was what, as the artist, I asked all the AI artists, if this was what you had in your mind, this is because when I create something, like when I made that, I knew what I wanted to get to. Like I chase these things. I have, before I pour the chemicals on the plate, I know what I'm going after, right? Like I have this idea, and sometimes it turns out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I get something I wasn't expecting. Sometimes I get exactly what I was expecting, but I know what I want. So I asked AI artists to take up the challenge of, if this is what is in your mind that you wanted to create it with AI. And what we found out is that there's not enough control of the AI at this point to get anywhere near what it is that we were trying to get to. So the AI just, you prompt it and it gives you something back, and it maybe give you 10 different results back. And then you say, oh, I like that one the best. You click on that. And then you can prompt it further and you can continue to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. But it's all this whole thing is about how the AI gives you what it thinks you want to see. And then us as humans, we say, oh, that's what I wanted to see. But that's not what you wanted to see at all. And you really, you got to take what it gives you. And you can't specifically say, I want this. And even if you feed in photographs that you had taken yourself and try to get to something reasonable that you had in your mind, a conception that you had, it's just the AI, it doesn't know how to get there. And there's no method by which you can prompt it to get exactly what you're trying to find. But it will give you something that it thinks you want to see. And then we just accept it as, oh, that's what I wanted.
I know I've been at weddings before where I unintentionally took a photo. Maybe I was moving the camera or something, and that photo turned out to be one of my favorites and the couple's favorite, which sometimes makes me ask the question as well, because it's the intention, and I see where you're coming from. And in large, I also agree with you, because I've said many times that the difference between a snapshot and a photograph is intention.
It is.
In how you frame the image, in waiting for the right moment to happen, in how you control the light coming in, any of these aspects.
Yes.
But there are times where I have an unintentional
happy accident.
A happy accident, and I love it. And I struggle with answering myself sometimes, is this art? And then I think at the end of the day, I've never really had to worry about this, because I guess I've never just been challenged on what is art more so than what we have in recent months, right? Because of AI. But going back to what you were saying about, like how you had this idea in your head, you then started putting steps into place, right? You contacted a prop master. This is what I need. You contacted a model. This is when I need you. You got you got everything ready to take that photo, and you got it. When it comes to AI and all those people putting in prompts to try to get something similar to what you had created, and they weren't able to.
They weren't.
Do you think that that is just a problem that we have today, and that in future iterations we'll have more control over it? Or do you think that fundamentally it'd be like telling my child to draw something that I see in my head, and of course it's never going to come out exactly how I see it? That's a big question right there.
It's a big question. It's using billions of images, so it's being influenced by these images. It can only give us something back from what it's been trained on, like what it knows, right? It knows the images that were put. So it has a limited number of inputs that it's working with. But we do know that this is going to be getting better, Raymond. This is going to continue to get better. The technology is going to get better. The interfaces by which you interact with this artificial intelligence, that's going to get better. So there's other tools. So they're laying tools on top of this general prompting. So there's this melding of additional tools to give people more and more control over it. I just don't want to be the guy that tells someone what is art and what is not. It just doesn't.
No, of course.
Yeah, it just seems like not a place that I want to be. Do I see that there could be, this is a new genre of art. We can just call it a new genre of art, and that they have their own, they describe it properly. Everyone is saying, well, this is what it is. It's AI. But to get people to do that, they're just not being honest. There was a group about a photographer, and I won't even say that, about a historical photographer that died in 2004, but this group has 145,000 followers. Okay, so this was a street photographer that was very well known. And someone presented a portrait of this said photographer that's been dead for 18 years. And I looked at it and I thought right away, this is not a portrait of this photographer. Like, this is AI. So I did a quick, I went out to TinEye, which, there's these reverse image lookups. And I looked, is this image of this very, it's like a portrait of David Bowie. Like, there's not many photographs of David Bowie that are going to come on the scene that
Yeah.
people have not seen, right? Like, we know there's not a lot of that. And this guy's even more obscure than David Bowie. So the fact that there's this photograph of him, and sure enough, that image has never appeared in like 8 billion websites. So the image was created by AI and of a man that existed. And I just want to think that, what would he think of that? Like, is it ethical? And I don't mean to get too serious here, but is it ethical to bring a portrait of a man into 2023 when he died 14 years ago?
Right.
From a historical aspect, is his family, would they be happy about this? Would he be happy about this? Are you going to, is that image somehow, the keywords, his name gets associated with that, and someone maybe in the future thinks that that's actually, it was a portrait of him on a specific day when he had no part of that.
I understand exactly what you're saying. And I know that, like you said, this is more of an obscure figure, right? Especially than David Bowie. But I think we all are. It's hard to get less obscure than David Bowie. But when it comes down to the ethics of the photograph here in this situation, somebody might say, very few people know exactly who this person is. But I think therein lies the danger, right? Because it doesn't have to happen to that person. But the danger could be that now we're creating these images of people who are public facing, of things that never happened.
Exactly.
And if we called it a photograph, we're immediately going to believe that it's rooted in reality.
That's the problem, okay? Because I've seen the argument, Raymond. I've seen the argument, well, people do a painting of David Bowie and he's been dead. Like, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing, okay?
Sure.
It's being presented as a photograph, and we humans know what a photograph is all about.
Yeah.
We know that it's a record of some light at a specific nanosecond of time.
Yeah.
Right. It was that person was sitting there, light was bouncing off their face, and we captured that light in some photosensitive material. It was never a deception. So when you do a painting, I've got a painting, a young college student did a painting of David Bowie. I've got one at my office. It's not the same thing. This was a black and white. So they made it black and white as well, because that's most of his work was black and white. It was presented that this is a photograph of so-and-so. And it wasn't a photograph of so-and-so. And I think there's a problem with that. And us humans, so you're right. We think of photographs as being truth. And then I'll say that, and then someone will come back. I've heard all the arguments. I've heard all the arguments. Like William Mortensen, my favorite photographer of all time, it's the 1920s, was putting witches flying in the sky, right? Like, there was no witch flying in the sky that he captured, but he took a photograph of the houses, the skyline, and then he took a photograph of a muse sitting on a broomstick and, in his studio, and he combined them together, made a collage, and made this beautiful, fantastic nude witch flying across the sky. I get it that's no reality.
But it's rooted in reality.
It's
all
rooted
of those
in
things.
Yes, she existed. The naked witch was a person.
Yeah.
And
those
she
houses
sat
were
in
real
front of him.
houses.
And those are real houses. Like I saw an example yesterday. I mean, we should talk a little bit about this generative fill on the Photoshop. Have you played with this yet?
I haven't played with it, but I've seen lots of examples of it. Yeah, I just don't see a use for it,
So
aside from just trying to make it amazing.
Like a guy he composed a shot of New York City, a skyline, and then thought, well, instead of having it portrait, I'm going to make it landscape. So he just asked the AI to fill left to right about 20% on both sides.
Yeah.
And the AI put these fake buildings in. So you have
one of the most
buildings,
iconic skyscrapers.
You have this, you know what I mean? You have Central Park and you have all this stuff going on. You know that building, you know that building, you know that building. And then all of a sudden on the sides, there's these buildings that have never existed and will never exist. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means for history. I don't know what that means for photography. And I think there's another thing happening here that I haven't talked about yet, but I think there's some playing with different technologies, and people are calling things AI when it's not really probably a neural network actually doing some of the stuff. They're using technologies, and everyone's wanting to say that this is AI.
Sure.
And the fact is, unless you went there and saw their servers, you got proof that there's a neural network that was doing this sleight of hand stuff. We don't even know that some of this stuff is legitimately artificial intelligence, right?
Right.
I know that that's happening. I know that people are trying to scam off other technologies and say, this is artificial intelligence, and there's no neural network or, there's no deep mind involved at all, because those are specific things. You have to have, in order for it to be artificial intelligence, there has to be a certain kind of computer setup. And I know that that's happening, that people are saying, oh, look, this is backed by AI, and they're using all this. So it's this new shiny thing that everyone, this little, if I get A period, I period somewhere in my search,
stock price goes way up.
People are going to start looking at it, right? There's that problem as well. But
yeah,
I'm not sure. The generative fill thing is, and I got in an argument with a guy just this week, and it's like, get it in camera, and then if you want to manipulate with Photoshop, we know that it's not the same thing. You actually started with a real photograph. There was actually a real photograph, and then you manipulate. Okay, I get that. But this is not that at all. You're not starting with any kind of reality.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And it's funny because for a long time in weddings, when I would create essentially it's a collage. It's a series of photos that I would take during the first kiss. Say, I don't know, 50, 80 photos, right? Telephoto lens, just small portion left.
It would take me weeks.
Down. Yeah, it's a lot of photos.
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, that's a month's worth of exposure time on wet plate there. And then I take all those photos, but I bring them into Photoshop and then create a photo stitch. And there's always an option to, I forget exactly what it's called, but like content aware fill in the edges, because as you can imagine, as it changes the perspective, it's not perfectly square. I've wrestled with myself on that, of whether it's okay or not. But anyway, I feel like that is kind of the same technology, because that's been around for a long time. Like, what is the difference between this content aware fill and this generative fill? And that I'm not sure. So maybe that goes back to that whole, is it really AI, or is it just, figuring out things around there? But regardless, let's stick back to this whole conversation about photography and figuring out kind of what you would like to see, because it's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to recognize a problem. How does the problem get fixed?
Well, one of the things that I proposed in the article was that there has to be some kind of identifier, like maybe baked into the data file. Okay. But that all quickly falls apart. So if it's an AI generated image, there's some kind of identifier in the file that you don't see. It doesn't have to be a watermark, something like that, but it has to be something that like Google can identify this as artificial intelligence. I can't put this on the front page of the New York Times. You know what I mean? Like, we know that this is AI. But the way technology works is, we can just grab screen grabs, and as soon as you grab a screen, right?
No metadata.
Nothing comes with it.
Yeah.
It becomes sterile. That's a problem. The one thing I wanted people to have, to be honest about what it is that we're seeing. I have no aversion to AI images when someone says AI horse, or, what I mean? Like, I have no aversion whatsoever. It's like, oh, cool. Great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I have no aversion. It's
what's the point? But whatever.
Yeah, but it's when it's the no honesty that I really have a problem. And I don't know how we're going to fix it. I don't know if the AI now can remove watermarks from photographs. Did you see this story?
Right. Yeah.
It takes like 4 seconds. So Getty Images just filed a lawsuit in the United Kingdom trying to ban this AI company from this software. So in 4 seconds, so you can just grab any photograph from Getty Images and put it in the AI and say, well, I just want this. I want this gone. The new generative fill thing for Photoshop is going to fix that same thing too. So now all of a sudden, the traditional way of identifying and protecting one's intellectual property is like stripped away. And there's people that have deep pockets like Getty that thinks that this isn't right. It feels kind of like, what was it back when they first started stealing music? What was the name of that service? Napster. Remember when Napster came on and everyone was up in arms, and then the industry came out and there was things put in place. But then we end up with something like Napster anyway, with the other services that are out there anyway. But at least they were done with contracts, and at least the artists are being compensated somewhat.
Sure.
There's arguments that they're not being compensated quite enough, and I agree with that. But at least it feels kind of like the Napster era, right? Like, it feels like, okay, this is the Wild West. Now we're just stealing people's photographs, and we're putting them in a database, and we're using that database to to generate other images, and then we're giving those rights away to the AI or to the application, or we're giving it to the person that just prompted 4 words.
Mm-hmm.
Jackson Pollock's a perfect example, right, of arguing if something was art, right? Like when he came on
Sure.
the scene, he was just splash and paint, and what did everyone say? My
This-
2-year-old can do that.
Yeah.
Like, this is an art, right? These are not new conversations, right? And then, his pieces go on to sell for millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And he created an entire new genre of painting. So it kind of, it's not like I've heard the argument, oh, this has happened before, Shane, you're making a big deal about this. I hear this all the time, and it just doesn't feel like this is that. And that's all I can say. This doesn't feel like this is that. Not at this level, not at this cowboy kind of Wild West kind of show where everything's okay and we can just deceive anyone.
I think that the fundamental problem there is that when it comes to Jackson Pollock, obviously, defining art is personal, right? However you define art is going to be different than how somebody else defines art. Yeah. But when we see a painting, we know that that's a painting. When we see a photograph, we know that that's a photograph up until this point, say, So when there were other technologies that came along, just from painting to photography, there was a lot of backlash. There was a lot of, or not backlash, criticism, right? Like, this is an art. This is simply a mechanical process, right? It's not, there's no artistic vision that goes into creating this, which today we fully accept that photography is an art form.
We do.
But I think the issue here goes back to the problem that we started with, is that we don't have a definition for what this is. We don't have a name for what this is. And because we don't have a name for what it is, it doesn't feel different for a lot of people. And that's what's so hard. That is what is so hard. If it was called, I don't know, vision images, whatever it is that you want to call it, but something more defined, something that's not as broad as just images, but we understand the point, we would understand what's going on. We would understand that fundamentally this is different. But because it is so photorealistic, or can be so photorealistic, that's the challenge that we need to answer. And I don't know how we're going to do that. I hope that we can come up with something. And the only thing that I can think of is similar to what Apple did when they introduced their live photos on the iPhone. They didn't call it something else. They called it live photos. So even though it has the word photo in there, we see it as something entirely different. When you watch it, you don't say to yourself, that's a photograph. But you don't say that's a video. It's an entirely different name. And that is what we're missing here.
Definitions are important.
So important. So how do we make an impact? How do we get this started?
Well, we just start raising awareness and letting people know about, that these different concerns, that we shouldn't just, I'm trying to understand what people have invested in it. Why are people up in arms to protect this? Like, why is this
calling it a photograph?
Yeah, or in calling it, or just in protecting in general. Like, if you see anything against AI, you're just, like I said, you're just a Luddite. You don't like technology, and you're an old man by definition, and you just don't understand where the world's going. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, think about the photojournalism. We need to have a base of reality in our news stories and stuff like that. If we start manipulating everything, we won't know what ends up. And it's a problem. I've just been on the bandwagon of just trying to, write some articles. I've been, the AI challenge that I put out there, I probably once or twice a week, I'm thinking about AI, and I'm seeing new things come up and new problems that may be arising from this. And is it going to be a fad? I'm not sure, Raymond. Is this just going to be, are people going to get bored with just like typing in a computer and having something come back? I don't know what the purpose of it's for, other than to see something. Unless there's some like dopamine thing that you're getting, like it's like a slot machine, right? It's that sound of the coins falling out of the slot machine. You pull the lever, you hear the coins hit the bottom of the tray, and you get that dopamine rush. I'm not sure, but we're making more images than we've ever made before. Just information glut, and this is just now. We don't even know what reality is. And I get the point that Photoshop, and that was an argument years ago, right? How long is Photoshop? Been around 20 years. This is going to ruin photography. This just does not seem like that. This just seems like that on steroids. Yeah. And I'm perfectly okay being wrong with this. I said that before the show. I'm perfectly okay being wrong about these concerns and stuff. Here's the thing. I hope I am wrong. That would be awesome. That would be awesome, that I'm completely wrong, and that I miss this fundamental, wonderful thing that's going to reshape art and photography, and it's going to take creation to another level. I don't know how you can take creation to another level when the person
Here's
that's
how.
creating isn't the owner of the object.
Sure. Yeah, that is a big problem. That is a big problem that whenever money is involved, they're always going to win. The company is going to win. And that the only way that you can control your creative output is for you to do it yourself. So fully understand that. But I think here is how people can become more creative and just I've never created, let me be clear, I've never created an image with anything like Midjourney, or because I've never had a need to create any sort of real photorealistic image.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in high school, I was just terrible with words and I had a book report due. And I said, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm absolutely not. I don't care if I get an F. I'm just so bad. It's almost embarrassing.
Okay.
But instead, I decided to make a stupid little video with my friends, showing off to my teacher that at least I understood the concepts within the book. My problem was putting it down in words. And from that moment on, he was like, you don't ever have to write a book report again. Like, just do video here. And I've always kind of had that issue with words. I can't put them together right. I can't, which is interesting that
it is
talk on a podcast all the time, but I still feel like words are very difficult for me, especially organizing them in my head. And I will say that from a ChatGPT has taken all of the words that I've given it, and the way that it organizes things is exactly how I imagine them being organized. And it has helped me immensely in that way, and has helped me create different creative pathways, I suppose. So playing devil's advocate here, I'm only assuming, and I hope that this is the case, that there's a certain subset of people who are very good with words and not so much visual literacy. And they're able to take these words and then turn it into something visual. But again, are they a writer? Because that's what they are good at. Or is what they created something entirely different? Did they create that? And I go back to the painter versus photographer argument of photography is just a mechanical process. There's no artistic vision inside. All you need is a technical understanding of how light works and you're gold. And I wonder if that's happening here. Like, if we're having a same moment in that aspect, not that these are the same images or the same result, but I'm wondering if we're just having an issue in describing the tools that we're using. And
I think your example is a good example. I'm not taking away that the AI can't do miraculous things, like can help people with learning disabilities. And I mean,
I apologize if it came off that way. I didn't intend to.
No. I'm just saying that there's examples of, where we should talk about this, that we're talking about all the bad things of this, and that it has the promise to cure cancer out there. You know what I mean? It has the promise to get humans off this earth. Right? I mean, these are huge things. I mean, it's already solved the protein folding problem that we thought we could never solve. So it has wonderful things, but we have to think that if the downside outweighs the good, we have to ask ourselves, why are we just jumping in? And maybe we just have to enter this realm a little bit more safely, or just with a little bit more caution. But I think as long as you have people that are willing to just try to deceive people, you're going to see it.
Yeah.
You're going to see it in the news realm. You're going to see it in the photojournalism stuff. People are going to make stuff that isn't true, and they're going to start a narrative behind it. And
Ben, how about we come to a close on a high note here, okay? Because I know that this feels to some people as if this is just pure doomsday. And talking before we hit record, I know that you don't feel that way. I don't feel that way, even though there are concerns. Like you said, we have to step into it a little bit more. But there are obviously exciting elements about AI. So let me ask you the question. If we come up with a new definition of any sort of image that is created by AI, a new definition, it has a name, something entirely different, and it's widely accepted, are we done?
I still think we have to address the stealing of images from artists' previous images. So you have to understand, Midjourney's using Leonardo, Da Vinci stuff. He's using William Mortensen stuff. It's using Picasso. It's using all these people, not just present day people, all the great masters. ChatGPT is using Shakespeare. These things have all been fed into it. And I think that these AI companies, if they wouldn't have been such a rush to go to market, they could have done this properly. They could have asked photographers, you know what I mean? If you have some photographs you don't really care about, can you give them to us? We'll give you a nickel a piece or a penny a piece, or maybe it had to be free, and people would have been more, that people would have been more than happy. We're doing this new AI thing. Please give us your images. They would have gotten billions of images. They wanted the shortcut. They just wanted to strip the internet and take and not give the credit where the credit's due, because without the input, you can't have the output.
Sure.
So this AI, it's nothing magic. It doesn't have that creative spark.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have, if you take all the images away from it, Midjourney can't do anything. So it needs those images, and the people that need to be acknowledged that provided those images, not just myself. Leonardo da Vinci needs to be acknowledged. Jackson Pollock, he's in there. I mean, everyone is in there. And I think it goes back to just honesty. And I don't have any problem with AI. I think there's going to be some big changes for photography. Just think about this. No more sets, no more props, no more lighting, no more camera, no more photographer.
I don't like that.
It seems like we're cutting some things out, right? We're losing something. These are all the things that you no longer need, and you're making imagery, which it's not a problem. Just tell me that's what it is. Just tell me that it was AI generated, and then I know the method. It's like taking a charcoal painting and saying it's a photograph, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's like taking a charcoal painting and saying, well, this is a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, you go like, that's not, but the problem we're going to have is that they're going to get so darn good at this that we're not going to be able to detect it. And
so then final question here. Image theft aside, right? I know that's a huge aside, right?
It is.
The stealing of millions of images, but putting billions of images. Let's put that aside for just a moment.
Okay.
Many professionals are worried that AI is going to take their job. And in fact, I've talked about this on the podcast. I think next year, the first product will probably come to market where a bride and a groom can just upload selfies that they took on their wedding day into some sort of AI type tool. And now they have world-class images of their wedding without a wedding photographer.
I hate to tell this to you, Raymond, that's already been done.
Okay, well then there we go.
It's already been done. So you can upload a photograph of you and your bride, and you can place you and your bride in any tuxedo, in any wedding dress, in any location in the world. I got married here in Bismarck, North Dakota, but now I can get married in Bali.
Right. Yes. And
I didn't have to get on a plane. What are those photographs going to mean to my children? What is that going to mean? Again, I keep coming back to this. What's the purpose?
Yeah.
What is the point?
I get it. I just think that there's a lot of people who don't value photography, or I hate to say authentic or true images, because as we know that there's some ambiguity in that.
Let's go positive again. Let's just say that this AI is going to drive the importance of what you and I do. It's going to
reality-based, authentic photography.
Yes. That at some point it's this new shiny object is just going to be tossed aside for what it is.
Yeah.
And people are going to want to come back. Let's say, I think that's a positive. I think that's we can draw that line, that people are going to have more appreciation for what I do here in my studio, getting that moon and getting the prop and getting the lighting. And, it took us 3 months.
Yeah.
It took us 3 months to get that shot. And guess how many exposures I made? I spent 3 months on the prop and getting everything ready and the model and everything together. 2 exposures. 2
exposures. Yeah.
That's what it took. I took 2 exposures.
So do you think that you only took 2 exposures because you knew in your head exactly what that image wanted?
When I got it, I got it.
You got it. Yeah.
I don't need the glut. I don't need I don't need more. More is not better. And if we, this is a beginning photographer's podcast, right? If I can just a little bit of, I'm not the greatest expert in this field, right? But if I can give a little bit to the listeners today, less is more. You don't have to take 4,000 photographs at a wedding. Okay. When I went and took the photograph of Greta Thunberg down at Standing Rock, I only had 6 clean glass plates in my box. That means I'm telling you, Raymond, you get to go take Evander Holyfield's photograph like I took.
Yeah.
Okay. Bring your camera. He's coming in at 2:00. Guess what? Your camera's full and you only have room for 6 exposures.
Yeah.
And you have them for 1 hour. It sounds insanity. But when you work under those constraints and you think about less is more, someone argued today that you could just take as many. It was even on your own. I think you posted it a week or so ago. You said sometimes take more photographs so you never know what's the gem that you may find or you may find. Do you remember doing that? There was something like, if you take more, I would like to argue, let's take less I think if you take less, you're going to spend more time on them. If you spend more time on them, you're going to get more of what you were looking for instead of just filling the camera up and sifting through all these photographs to find that little gem. Because if you just, turn that shutter open, it just captures 100 photographs. You're back to this. Was it your hand stroke? Was it your brush stroke that got that one photograph? Or was it just chance? It shouldn't be chance.
Sure.
It happens every once in a while. We talked about it. There's happy accidents in my studio all the time. But if there's the intent, if you go back to the intent, I think we'll all do better in photography.
Follow-up question, devil's advocate here. And I'm going to make this real quick. Your
okay.
latest photo that you took, is it better than your first wet plate photo that you took?
Absolutely.
And the difference is?
The difference is that I think the more photographs I take, the less I like my work. Okay. The more photographs no, that's true.
Yeah.
This is a realization that I've come up to. So I've made 4,714 plates in 11 years. That's how many exposure. You would do that in a wedding. You could do that in a wedding.
In a day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Taken me 11 years to make that many plates. I've realized that my standards have changed and that I do that moment where this is what I wanted. This is the magic, right? It's almost like the golfer hitting that hole in one, right? It's like, or that perfect swing. You hit it every once in a while and you only have to hit it every once in a while. The more I take photographs, the less I like my work. And I think that that's a positive thing, because it means my standards have changed, right? And that when I first was starting, if I got my first photograph, you just mentioned it, right? It's right there of my brother. It's 4 feet from me, hanging on the wall here, my first wet plate. I look at it, but I look at it with, I look back at fondly, but it was big leaps. But now it's these little baby steps that I'm fighting and kicking and scratching just to make that next improvement. And I think that's what it's all about in the end. So, and I don't think this is a process, and I don't think even your, digital photography, it's a process that you should ever feel comfortable that you mastered. You know what I mean? I've heard there's some trombone player that was 98 years old and he had the world's best trombone player. I don't remember his name. I think it was a trombone. It was some brass instrument. And they asked him, why do you still practice? You're 98 years old. You were a master. Why are you still practicing? He says, because I still think I can get better. Wow. So that's what we should try to do. And I still think that I could get better. I never want to make my masterpiece. I want to continue to search for my masterpiece. And it's taking little baby steps from here on out. But I think that's a good rule. And I like my work less the more I make of it. And for me, that's reassuring. And anytime I've told that, I tell that to students every once in a while, and their jaws drop and they're like, what in the hell is this guy talking about? But
I get the sentiment and I appreciate it so much, because it tells me that you're taking your craft extremely seriously and that it means a lot to you.
I don't want to get to the pinnacle. We don't want to get to the pinnacle. Why do we want to get to the pinnacle?
That one day I reach that same spot of not loving the images that come out of my camera and hoping that each one just gets better and better. But Shane, I don't know how to end it any better than that, honestly. I know that we are coming to the end of our time here, so I got to let you go. But before I do, why don't you let listeners know where we can learn a little bit more about you and your work as well, because it is truly awe-inspiring work.
Yeah, well, thanks. So if you just go to Google and type in Balkowitsch, Balkowitsch, wet plate, you're going to get a myriad of articles and stuff about my work. You can go to Amazon. There's a documentary, a 1-hour documentary about the work that I do. A Northern Plains Native Americans, a modern wet plate perspective. It's a book series. I'm on a 20-year journey to capture 1,000 Native Americans. I've published 2 books so far. Book 3, I'm 41 images away. I'm going to be at 750 images after 10 years. I'm 41 images away from starting on volume 3, and then I'll do volume 4 eventually. And if you go onto Facebook, you can find Balkowitsch, same spelling. You can find me on Instagram under Balkowitsch, and just follow my work. If someone's interested in wet plate photography, I founded a group of Friends of Frederick Scott Archer on Facebook. You can join us there and learn a little bit more about this archaic photographic process that humanity abandoned 170 years ago. And, there's still some of us, these old holdouts, that are still trying to prove that this is still legitimate with all this technology, right? With all this technology, prove that this is still a legitimate art form. And that's what I try to do every single Friday that I'm in here.
I think anybody who challenges that to say that it's not a legitimate art form has probably just never done it. And they are the Luddites. So again, Shane, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate this talk, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
It's been an honor, Raymond. Thank you so much.
Shane is a really interesting guy. I really feel like he takes the time to think about what potential problems are, but also I applaud his ability to take a stance on something, a hard stance on something, and fight for it. This was not a doomsday podcast about AI. Personally, I'm excited for the future possibilities and have honestly used AI quite a bit, and like I said, in the way that I organize my thoughts. And while there is no stopping the AI train, there are a lot of conversations to be had about, again, what it is not, and how to use it most effectively. I'm optimistic that we're going to figure it out and create an amazing world that, like Shane said, can solve things like cancer and other huge problems that we face. But my hope is that we have a clear differentiator between what is real and what is generated by AI, even though they can look indistinguishable. What do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts and your feedback on this idea, this topic, this episode. You can reach out to me directly via the contact form at beginnerphotographypodcast@gmail.com, where there you can, shoot me an email, or better yet, send me a virtual voicemail to let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear them. And while you're there, be sure to download my free Picture Perfect Camera Settings cheat sheet with camera settings for more than 10 popular types of photography. And it's filled with my personal and professional images and the real life camera settings that I use to capture those images so that you know just where to get started. So again, beginnerphotographypodcast.com, click the contact tab at the top of the page. That is it for this week. Thank you again so much for tuning into this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast, and thank you to the sponsor of the podcast, CloudSpot. Truly is the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. Trust me, I use them. You can learn more about CloudSpot by heading over to deliverphotos.com, and remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.